The cameras were already rolling when it happened. A single question sliced through the crowded hearing room like a blade. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her tone calm, measured, almost surgical. "Where is the missing $1.1 billion?" The words hung in the air. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Reporters froze mid-keystroke. Aides shifted nervously in their seats. And across the table, Pam Bondi's carefully rehearsed composure cracked. Her eyes darted. Her lips pressed tightly together before she forced out a smile that fooled no one. Beneath the glare of the lights, her face betrayed her panic. Bondi, the seasoned political veteran, looked cornered. The silence in the chamber was deafening. You could feel the weight of the question pressing down on everyone present. Gasps rippled through the room, followed by an audible murmur as the gravity of Crockett's challenge registered. Billion with a B. It wasn't just money, it was accountability. Bondi adjusted her microphone, fumbling for words, her polished veneer slipping away with each second she hesitated. But Crockett didn't flinch. She sat back, steady and unshaken, her gaze locked firmly on Bondi, as if daring her to wriggle free. The contrast was electric. The calm prosecutor of truth versus the defensive custodian of excuses. And outside that room, the nation was already watching. On Twitter, hashtags began to form in real time. Clips of Crockett's question hit feeds before Bondi could even attempt an answer. The tension in the chamber was mirrored online, where outrage boiled over. How does $1.1 billion just vanish? Bondi looked shook. Crockett is all of us right now. Every second stretched into eternity, the pressure mounting with each heartbeat. Bondi opened her mouth, closed it again. The silence was more damning than any stumble could have been. She wasn't just answering to Jasmine Crockett. She was answering to the American people, and she knew it. In that opening volley, the stage was set. Arrogance against dignity, power against principle, and the truth demanding to be heard. Crockett had fired the first shot, and Bondi was already on the ropes. But this was only the opening salvo. What followed next would leave Pam Bondi's reputation in shambles. $1.1 billion. It's a number so staggering, so impossible to ignore, that the very sound of it sends a chill through anyone who hears it. This isn't pocket change. This isn't a misplaced ledger entry. This is money that could rebuild schools, modernize hospitals, or put roofs over the heads of families who've been left behind. And yet, somehow it's gone. That's why Crockett's question cut so deeply. Because it wasn't just about accounting. It was about trust. What does it mean for ordinary Americans when billion-dollar sums vanish into the ether while politicians pretend everything is fine? Pam Bondi knew the weight of that question, and she knew the stakes. For years, she had lived in the glow of power, moving effortlessly through the circles of influence. She was the polished insider, the familiar face on Sunday shows, the defender of the party line. She was the establishment's loyal attorney, quick with a smile and quicker with a dismissal. But behind that veneer were controversies that trailed her every step, donations questioned, decisions scrutinized, allegiances doubted. And then, across from her, sat Jasmine Crockett. A different story entirely. Crockett was no establishment darling. She didn't rise by playing the quiet game or currying favor with elites. She came up the hard way, through the courts, through activism, through the kind of grassroots struggle that sharpened her edge and made her impossible to intimidate. When Crockett spoke, people listened, not because she was the loudest voice in the room, but because she carried the authority of lived experience. She had been a public defender, standing shoulder to shoulder with people who couldn't buy their way out of the system. She knew the cost of corruption and neglect, and she wasn't about to let a billion-dollar mystery slide into the shadows. That's what made this clash different. It wasn't two politicians trading barbs for headlines. It was a reckoning. Crockett wasn't just exposing numbers. She was exposing an entire culture of impunity. The stakes weren't just Bondi's reputation. They were the public's faith in accountability itself. And the people watching knew it. Social media was ablaze, voices rising in collective disbelief. "That money belongs to us," one post read. "How dare they treat it like monopoly cash?" Another wrote, "Jasmine Crockett isn't just questioning Bondi. She's questioning every single politician who thinks we won't notice." Bondi, for all her polish, suddenly looked small in that chair. She was the voice of the establishment trying desperately to sound unbothered. while Crockett represented the tidal wave of frustration that had been building for years. Every pause, every glance, every nervous shift in Bondi's seat sent a message louder than her words. She was rattled, and the audience knew. This wasn't going to be contained to a single question. Crockett wasn't just poking at cracks in Bondi's armor. She was prying them open, piece by piece, in front of a nation that was tired of being told to look the other way. Because the truth was simple, $1.1 billion doesn't just disappear. Someone knows, someone profits, and someone, finally, was being forced to answer. The room could sense it. The unraveling was coming. Not a debate, but a dismantling. Not a skirmish, but a showdown destined to echo far beyond these walls. And just when Bondi thought she could hide behind rehearsed talking points, Crockett set a trap she never saw coming. To understand why this moment landed with such explosive force, you have to understand who Pam Bondi was long before she sat across from Jasmine Crockett. For years, Bondi cultivated an image of polish and authority. She carried herself as though accountability was her brand, presenting as the smiling face of Florida's law and order establishment. Her rise to power wasn't built on grassroots struggle or insurgent battles. It was engineered through connections, image management, and a steady climb up the rungs of the political ladder. As Florida's Attorney General, Bondi styled herself as the people's watchdog. She stood at podiums declaring her commitment to integrity, promising to protect families from fraud, to safeguard the law, to put principle above politics. At least, that was the sales pitch. But just beneath the polished exterior, cracks began to show. Reporters had long questioned her judgment. They pointed to campaign donations from powerful corporations whose legal troubles somehow seemed to vanish into silence. They remembered her reluctance to challenge the politically connected, her tendency to turn the harsh light of prosecution on the powerless while sparing those with the right friends. It was a pattern: smile, deflect, pivot, and walk away unscathed. Then came the national stage. Pam Bondi rose to prominence not simply as a state official, but as one of Donald Trump's most loyal defenders. She was there during the impeachment saga, taking center stage on national television, delivering smooth, practiced arguments designed not to uncover truth, but to shield power. To her supporters, she was a warrior in designer heels, a stalwart voice against critics of the administration. To her detractors, she was the embodiment of hypocrisy, a lawyer sworn to justice. Now repurposed as a political bodyguard, the contradictions piled higher. She spoke about values, but accepted money from those she was supposed to regulate. She championed transparency while sidestepping direct questions with carefully rehearsed evasions. And always, she carried herself with an air of certainty, as though authority itself was her shield. It was arrogance dressed up as confidence. She could stride into any room, lock eyes with a camera, and deliver lines with the unshakable assurance of someone who believed she would never truly be cornered. Bondi knew the rules of the establishment because she had mastered them. Stay polished, stay connected, stay untouchable. But arrogance is a fragile armor, especially when confronted by someone unwilling to play by those same rules. The moment Crockett asked about the missing $1.1 billion, the very traits that once seemed like Bondi's strengths, her polish, her rehearsed charm, her insider confidence, became glaring weaknesses. Her smile looked forced. Her deflections looked evasive. Her calm looked brittle. This wasn't the first time Bondi faced questions about ethics, but it was the first time she faced someone who refused to accept her playbook answers. Crockett didn't blink. She didn't soften. She didn't defer to the establishment's unwritten rules of politeness. That refusal, that insistence on piercing through the polished facade, was precisely what made the confrontation so devastating. Bondi's career had been built on control. Control of the narrative, control of the room, control of her image. But here, in this chamber, with Crockett's gaze unflinching, control was slipping away. And the more she tried to grab it back, the more transparent her arrogance became. For years, Pam Bondi had symbolized the establishment's ability to protect itself. She was a defender of the powerful masquerading as a servant of the people. She represented the insulation of privilege, the quiet understanding that some questions would never be asked in earnest. That was her comfort zone, operating in spaces where the tough questions were softened, where accountability was always negotiable, where connections outweighed consequences. But not this time. This time, the billion-dollar question was not going to be smoothed over by charm or deflection. This time, the air was thick with a demand that couldn't be laughed off or brushed aside. For the first time in her carefully managed career, Bondi found herself truly cornered, not by partisan critics, not by the press, but by a woman who had no interest in protecting the establishment's dignity. Bondi had built her image on integrity. Crockett was about to reveal how hollow that claim truly was. But if Bondi represented the establishment, Jasmine Crockett embodied something far more disruptive. Long before she sat across from Pam Bondi, Jasmine Crockett had lived a story that could never be rehearsed, never scripted, and never bought. Hers was a story born of grit, persistence, and a relentless belief that truth, no matter how inconvenient, must be spoken aloud. To the millions now watching her mete out calm accountability, it might have looked effortless. But behind that composure was a lifetime of proving herself in rooms that were never built for her. Crockett's roots weren't gilded with connections or privilege. She came from a background that understood the realities of struggle. She knew what it meant to fight for space, to fight for dignity, to fight for opportunity in systems designed to push certain voices aside. That early understanding shaped everything that came later. It forged a woman unwilling to cower, unwilling to soften her fire just to make the comfortable feel at ease. Her legal career began not in corner offices or corporate boardrooms, but in the trenches of public defense. Day after day, Crockett stood beside people who had no lobbyists, no billion-dollar law firms, no safety net of privilege. They had her, and that meant she had to be sharp, unrelenting, and fearless. In the courtroom, she learned to slice through bluster with precision, to expose contradictions with facts, and to stay steady when opposing counsel tried every trick to rattle her. It was in those years as a public defender that Crockett earned her reputation as the people's defender. Not because it was catchy, but because it was true. She spoke in the cadence of someone who knew her clients weren't statistics. They were people with families, with stories, with futures worth defending. And every time she walked into a courtroom, she carried that weight like armor. That armor would serve her well when she entered politics. Unlike Bondi, Crockett didn't glide into power on the coattails of insiders. She clawed her way there, backed by communities who saw in her a reflection of their own struggles. Her campaign wasn't about glossy slogans or boardroom endorsements. It was about knocking on doors, about rallies where ordinary people felt heard, about showing up when it wasn't convenient. And when she won her seat in Congress, Crockett didn't shed that fire. She carried it with her, refusing to morph into another politician who blended seamlessly into the establishment she had once challenged. She arrived in Washington unafraid to disrupt, unafraid to rattle cages, unafraid to call out hypocrisy, even when it came from those with far more seniority. That is what made her showdown with Bondi feel inevitable. Crockett had been tempered by pressure, by the kinds of battles that polish a person's instincts into steel. She didn't flinch when men in expensive suits tried to talk over her. She didn't shrink when political opponents smeared her name. And she didn't hesitate to ask the billion-dollar question everyone else tiptoed around. For Crockett, accountability wasn't an abstract principle. It was personal. She knew what communities could do with resources that were too often squandered by elites. She knew how corruption trickled down, not as a political talking point, but as lived reality for families who felt its sting. Asking Bondi about the missing $1.1 billion wasn't just a political maneuver. It was the culmination of everything Crockett had stood for her entire career. That power must answer to the people it claims to serve. The contrast between her and Bondi couldn't have been sharper. Bondi, the polished insider, spoke in the safe, empty language of the establishment. Crockett, by contrast, carried the raw, unfiltered energy of someone who had fought her way into spaces she wasn't supposed to occupy. Bondi wielded charm as a shield. Crockett wielded truth as a weapon. And the people saw it. They felt it. Watching Crockett sit across from Bondi was like watching a mirror crack in real time. For every viewer who had ever felt dismissed, every immigrant family told to wait their turn, every working-class parent who wondered where their tax dollars really went, Crockett was their voice. She wasn't just speaking at Bondi. She was speaking for all of them. That's why the silence in that room carried such weight. Crockett wasn't raising her voice, wasn't resorting to theatrics. She didn't need to. Her power came from composure. From the steady, piercing way she asked the question no one else dared ask. From the courage to hold the line, even as a seasoned insider tried to shake her. And that's what made her uniquely prepared for this moment. Every courtroom battle, every grassroots fight, every hard-earned victory had led here, to this chamber, this confrontation, this billion-dollar reckoning. Bondi had her polish, but Crockett had her purpose. And purpose always outlasts polish. The sparks had only just begun to fly. And when these two worlds collided, the sparks were nothing short of explosive. The calm silence that had once favored Jasmine Crockett's question was quickly shattered by the rising volume of Pam Bondi's voice. At first, she tried to laugh it off, brushing at her microphone with the strained air of someone pretending not to be rattled. But as Crockett pressed again, slowly, deliberately, Bondi's composure began to fracture. "I've already addressed that," Bondi snapped, her words sharper now, her tone clipped. She leaned forward, her smile curdling into something closer to a sneer. "You're twisting this, Congresswoman. You don't understand the full picture." But Crockett didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her glasses, her tone even, her phrasing precise. "I'm asking you very directly. Where's the money? $1.1 billion. The American people deserve to know." Bondi's voice rose again. She interrupted, talked over, tried to drown Crockett out with volume instead of substance. The veteran politician leaned into the familiar tools of arrogance, condescension, deflection, the suggestion that Crockett was somehow unqualified to ask the question. The room shifted uncomfortably, but Crockett sat still, unbothered, like a surgeon preparing for the next incision. Every attempt Bondi made to overpower her only deepened the contrast. Crockett's voice never wavered, her cadence slow and surgical. She repeated the question, narrowing it, closing escape route after escape route. "If you claim to have addressed it, then point us to the documentation. If you claim there is no scandal, then where are the receipts? Because until you answer, this looks exactly like what the American people fear it is, corruption hiding in plain sight." Gasps fluttered through the chamber. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. Cameras zoomed closer to Bondi's face, catching the tightening jaw, the twitch at the corner of her eyes. She was unraveling. Bondi raised her voice another octave, insisting on her credibility, throwing out vague phrases, complex processes, ongoing reviews, standard protocols. But her words had lost their weight. They floated in the air like smoke, dissipating quickly under the sharp beam of Crockett's calm interrogation. And Crockett knew it. She leaned in now, her voice still level but her questions sharper, almost rhythmic. Each one cut a little deeper, exposing the weakness beneath Bondi's bluster. She was dismantling her opponent not with volume, but with precision. The more Bondi lashed out, the smaller she seemed. The more Crockett remained unshaken, the larger she loomed. It was a play-by-play unraveling. Bondi interrupted once more, her tone dripping with disdain. "This is beneath the dignity of this committee," she barked. But dignity was the very thing slipping from her grasp. Crockett raised an eyebrow, the faintest smirk flickering as she delivered the line that would echo online within minutes. "What's beneath the dignity of this committee is billions disappearing without answers." The audience burst into murmurs again, the tension snapping like a taut wire. Social media feeds lit up. Crockett's not here to play. Bondi's losing it. This is the accountability moment we've been waiting for. Still, Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm was louder than Bondi's shouting. Her focus sharper than Bondi's scattered deflections. Like a fencer in the ring, she saw the openings, and with each question, each measured pause, she landed strikes that left her opponent stumbling. By the midpoint of the exchange, Bondi was red-faced, her carefully styled hair falling slightly out of place as she leaned hard into the microphone. She gestured wildly, her words tumbling over themselves in a frantic attempt to regain control. But every gesture, every outburst only highlighted the very thing she was desperate to hide: fear. And Crockett? She remained exactly as she had been from the first question, centered, steady, and unyielding. Every camera angle reinforced the story, the hero of composure versus the villain of arrogance. The tension reached its peak. The room buzzed with disbelief, outrage, and anticipation. Viewers at home leaned forward, sensing that something monumental was about to happen. Crockett had Bondi cornered. But she hadn't delivered the final strike. Not yet. But Crockett wasn't done. She was about to deliver the blow that would change the entire room. The moment had been building like a storm. Pam Bondi's voice grew sharper, her gestures more frantic, her insistence on control increasingly hollow. And then, just as her arrogance reached its peak, Jasmine Crockett delivered what would become the moment replayed on millions of screens, dissected in countless tweets, etched into the memory of everyone who witnessed it. Crockett paused. Silence fell over the chamber. She leaned back in her chair, giving Bondi just enough room to think she had regained her footing. It was the kind of silence that carries weight, the silence before a verdict. Then, calmly, she leaned into her microphone. You say there's no scandal. You say the processes are routine. Fine. But I have here. She held up a folder thick with documents. The very receipts you claim don't exist. Gasps. Actual, audible gasps rippled through the audience. Bondi's face tightened as cameras zoomed in, catching every twitch, every flicker of panic she tried to hide. The polished insider suddenly looked like a cornered defendant, and Crockett was both the prosecutor and the jury. These aren't rumors, Crockett continued, her voice sharp but calm. These are official records. Payments that don't align, transfers that can't be explained, and contracts signed under your watch that leave $1 billion unaccounted for. She let the words land like hammer strikes, each syllable driving deeper into the image Bondi had worked so hard to protect. Bondi opened her mouth to protest, but the sound caught in her throat. She fumbled, tried to interrupt, but Crockett lifted a hand, steady and commanding. No, you've had your time. The American people have waited long enough for answers. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in awe. Even members of the committee who usually stayed silent couldn't suppress their reactions. One raised his eyebrows in disbelief. Another leaned over to whisper, shaking his head slowly. The audience behind Crockett sat frozen, torn between outrage and admiration. Online, the floodgates burst open. Tweets lit up screens like fireworks. Jasmine has the receipts. Game over. This is the mic drop moment of the year. Bondi just got destroyed in real time. Crockett wasn't done. She flipped through the folder, pulling out highlighted pages, reading off-line items that didn't add up. With each revelation, Bondi's defenses crumbled further. Her smile vanished entirely, replaced by the tight-lipped look of someone bracing against impact. Here's a contract, Crockett said, sliding a page forward. Signed under your authority. Here's another, with a transfer that leads to nowhere. And here, she held up a final sheet, is the missing trail. Do you see this, Miss Bondi? Because the American people do. The chamber was electric. Bondi stammered, reaching for her microphone. That's not the full context. Crockett cut her off with a line that would live on in headlines. Context doesn't erase $1 billion. The words hit like a gavel, final and undeniable. The room broke into murmurs again, the kind of low roar that signals a collective realization. The mask had slipped, the truth was laid bare, and there was no spinning it back. Bondi tried once more to regroup, her voice rising to insist that investigations were ongoing, that no wrongdoing had been proven. But by now, her words were background noise. No one believed them. No one could. Not after Crockett's meticulous takedown, not after the receipts had been laid on the table for all to see. And Crockett knew she had her opponent exactly where she wanted her. She didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply leaned forward, eyes locked on Bondi, and delivered the quietest, most devastating line of all. This is why people don't trust the system. Because people like you think you're above answering to it. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting match could have been. Bondi looked down, shuffled papers, desperately searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. Cameras caught it all. The collapse of confidence, the unraveling of control, the transformation of a polished insider into a public cautionary tale. And outside, America watched. Clips spread like wildfire. Instagram reels, TikTok edits, YouTube reaction videos, all capturing the moment Crockett dismantled Bondi's defenses piece by piece. Hashtags trended. Hashtag receipts don't lie. Hashtag Crockett versus Bondi. Hashtag where is the billion? Even politicians who rarely commented on these hearings chimed in online. This is accountability at work, one senator tweeted. Proud to see leaders like Jasmine Crockett standing firm. Celebrities retweeted the clip with one-word captions. Boom. Ouch. Legend. Bondi, meanwhile, faded into the background of her own downfall. Every attempt at damage control only amplified the impression that she had been caught, cornered, and crushed. What made the moment unforgettable wasn't just the facts. It was the framing. Crockett hadn't shouted, hadn't resorted to theatrics. She had used patience as her weapon, composure as her shield, and truth as her blade. She dismantled arrogance not with fury, but with dignity. And that, more than anything, resonated with the audience watching. Because in Crockett's calm precision, people saw the validation they craved. They saw someone willing to do what so many politicians refused to. Ask the hard questions, present the evidence, and refuse to be silenced by power. They saw themselves in her refusal to back down. The climax of the exchange ended not with a bang, but with a whisper of truth that rang louder than any outburst. Crockett set her folder down, her point made, her composure intact. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to revel. She knew the evidence spoke louder than any flourish ever could. Bondi sat slumped, her armor shattered, her reputation leaking away in real time. The chamber, the committee, the nation, they had all witnessed the mic drop counterattack. And they knew nothing would ever be the same. And when the dust settled, the fallout was unlike anything Bondi had ever faced before. The chamber emptied, but the echoes of Jasmine Crockett's takedown refused to fade. By the time Bondi left her seat, her face flushed and her words stumbling into half-hearted denials, the outside world had already rendered its verdict. On Twitter, the hashtag where is the billion shot to the top within minutes. It wasn't just trending, it was exploding. Millions of posts poured in, each replaying the mic drop moment from a different angle. Context doesn't erase $1 billion was plastered across GIFs, memes, and remixed clips set to triumphant soundtracks. One video looped Bondi's stunned silence with a caption that read, "When you realize the receipts are real." Another showed Crockett calmly sliding the papers forward, overlaid with the words, "Boss move." TikTok stitched the moment into cultural shorthand. Teenagers lip-synced Crockett's line. Influencers reenacted the exchange with mock props, and activists framed it as the embodiment of speaking truth to power. Instagram Reels highlighted Crockett's unshakable demeanor, labeling her the prosecutor of the people. Cable news couldn't ignore it either. Within hours, commentators across the spectrum were weighing in. On progressive channels, the tone was celebratory. Crockett brought accountability to the doorstep of privilege, one anchor declared. Even centrist analysts admitted it was a rare moment when polished talking points collapsed under the weight of cold, hard evidence. Conservative outlets, meanwhile, scrambled to spin the exchange, framing Bondi as the victim of a grandstanding ambush. But even their viewers couldn't escape the viral clips tearing across the internet. Bondi herself seemed paralyzed. Her first response, a hurried statement issued through a spokesperson, claimed her remarks had been taken out of context. But it rang hollow. The receipts weren't a soundbite, they were documents, and Crockett had laid them bare for the world to see. Late-night comedians piled on. One mocked Bondi's repeated attempts to interrupt, mimicking her flustered tone before dropping Crockett's line with perfect comedic timing. The audience roared. Another called it the billion-dollar checkmate. Celebrities chimed in too. A-list actors tweeted their support. Musicians posted clips with fire emojis. Activists used the moment as a rallying cry for transparency and reform. Crockett's name became a symbol of accountability, a lightning rod for those long disillusioned by establishment arrogance. The court of public opinion had spoken, and it wasn't even close. Crockett was the victor, the hero who had calmly sliced through arrogance with the precision of a scalpel. Her words carried beyond the hearing room, becoming mantras for those tired of being told their outrage didn't matter. Meanwhile, Bondi's silence grew louder. Her attempts to reframe the confrontation as political theater only deepened the impression that she had no real defense. Each interview she ducked, each awkward pause in her rare appearances, became memes in themselves. The once polished insider was now a punchline. What made the aftermath so devastating for Bondi wasn't just Crockett's evidence. It was the way the public seized it, amplified it, and turned it into cultural currency. The moment no longer belonged to the politicians in the room. It belonged to the people who replayed it, reshaped it, and declared their allegiance to the woman who refused to flinch. And as the days passed, the ripple effects grew. Grassroots organizations cited the confrontation as proof that speaking truth to power could change the narrative. Civic groups launched petitions demanding deeper investigations into the missing funds. Young activists pointed to Crockett as a model of what politics should look like: fearless, unbought, unyielding. Bondi's defenders tried to mount counterattacks, but they were drowned out by the sheer force of the viral tide. Every time they claimed the exchange was exaggerated, another clip surfaced, another meme went viral, another voice joined the chorus. The receipts don't lie. So here's the call. If you believe in voices like Jasmine Crockett's holding the powerful to account, don't just watch this moment. Carry it forward. Subscribe, share, spread this story. Because this isn't just about politics or even about 1 billion missing dollars. It's about us, about what we demand, about who we uplift, and about the kind of future we're willing to fight for. When arrogance loses to accountability, when truth silences bluster, that's when democracy breathes again. And it's up to us to make sure it keeps breathing. So here's the call. If you believe in voices like Jasmine Crockett's holding the powerful to account, don't just watch this moment. Carry it forward. Subscribe, share, spread this story. Because this isn't just about politics or even about 1 billion missing dollars. It's about us, about what we demand, about who we uplift, and about the kind of future we're willing to fight for. When arrogance loses to accountability, when truth silences bluster, that's when democracy breathes again. And it's up to us to make sure it keeps breathing.